Hello everybody, welcome back to another edition of Indycar. My name is Gordon Ross and I'm broadcasting today from Drumchapel overlooking the city of Glasgow. Beautiful Friday afternoon here and a lot of interesting things to talk about this morning. The main one of which I wanted to really talk about was the possibility of repatriated powers from Europe falling into the hands of the Tories under David Mundell. Now we know this isn't just an idle threat, it's not just a risk of this happening. This is what is going to happen because the Tories are setting up an office in New Waverley and they've already hired or are hiring over 100 new civil servants to help David Mundell. Now the theory was, or the explanation for this new office was that this was going to be a new hub where the British government operating in Scotland would have an office so it could liaise with the Scottish government and decide how to govern the country. The difficulty with this is that we've now, or the Tories are about to create a two-tier government system in Scotland which didn't exist before. They've obviously felt that Mundell is isolated up here and has little power, and so they're using the opportunity presented by Brexit to acquire over 111 separate powers which should be repatriated to the Holyrood Parliament, but which are not being repatriated to Scotland at all. They're being brought back to Scotland but under the control of the London government, under the control of, in turn, Mr Mundell. And so this leaves us with the interesting situation of a whole series of government powers which really should be in the hands of the Scottish government, but which are not, but which are in the hands of the English government in Scotland. So we'll have a system where things like fishing and agriculture, the use of pesticides, the maintenance of the environment, the controlling levels of pollution and restricting the use of the land where pollution is going to be a problem, in the hands of frackers and Tory backers of fracking. Now imagine for a moment where you have a Scotland which is essentially running itself, but where the food supply coming from our own farms, our own farm produce, our dairy produce, our meat, our vegetables, not to mention the fish that are caught around our coasts, all controlled by a man from London operating from an office in Edinburgh. So we're in a situation where the quality of our food, how it's produced, where it's produced, how much money we pay for it, how much subsidy goes towards that food, is not under the control of our own government anymore. In other words, our food supply is going to be controlled by a foreign power in London. Now, to me, okay, I'm maybe over-egging the pie a little bit. We're not necessarily going to be starved out by London, but do we really want somebody like David Mundell in charge of fishing? Do we want him in charge of farming? Do we want him in charge of maintaining the environment and looking after the environment? Well, personally, no, I don't. Because although I'm sure the fishermen who voted for the Tories would be delighted to have all of their laws controlled by a Tory from London, the rest of the country is not so keen on it. And there aren't that many fishermen anyway. They don't make that much money for the country. It's not a very big industry. It's been bargained away by the UK governments over successive decades. The farming industry, which we now know is going to be largely controlled by the London government by retaining these powers in the Scottish or the Scotland office or whatever the heck they're calling it this week, under the control of the Tories. There is absolutely no way the Tories are going to relinquish these powers to the Scottish government, despite their explanations of having a hub so that they can liaise with the Scottish government, so that they can cooperate with each other to run the country. This is not only a power grab, it is a consolidation of British power in Scotland. That's what this is about. It's about England having control over a fundamental strategic resource, i.e. our food supply. And they are going to use that against the SNP. That's their aim. It's nothing to do with good governance. Believe me, if the Tories were about good governance, we'd all be voting for them. But they're not. They're about making sure that Scotland doesn't break away. And that means controlling a fundamental resource that we cannot live without, e.g. food. And also being able to do what they like with fracking. Remember that under the EU regulations that are coming back to Scotland, that are supposed to be repatriated to Scotland, we would take control over many of the much wider ranging environmental controls, like CPAD, Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, would be much strengthened, and the Scottish Government would have the ability to legislate about the protection of the environment, and that would strengthen the case against fracking if we had that control. But we don't. That control is passing into the hands of a man whose party is trying to promote fracking in Scotland, and that's something I think everybody should be angry about and everybody should be worrying about. So I guess my point today is that if Mundell decides to use these powers, and I'm sure he will, he is going to use them as a tool to keep the SNP down and to try and divide the Scottish electorate so that his tiny party in Scotland, which has something like 12% of the popular vote at the moment and which is losing seats and losing support according to latest polls, his tiny party is going to control our food supply and control how our food is produced, control whether or not pesticides are used. He might decide that he's going to reintroduce neonicotinoid insecticides, which are poisoning bees. He might decide to increase the use of pesticides and herbicides on farms, which is going to cover your produce in more chemicals. He might decide to introduce GM crops. He could decide to do all kinds of things. But the point is, do we want him to have the power to do that? And I think for most of us the answer is no, because only 12% of the Scottish population support the Tory party in Scotland. And that leaves 88% of us who hate the Tories and don't want to have them have anything to do with controlling any part of Scotland whatsoever. And that means the majority of us do not want David Mundell controlling a single thing in Scotland. His job as the Scottish Office Minister is simply to liaise between the devolved government and the central government. His job is not to steal the powers of the devolved government and then use them against the population, which is exactly what is going to happen if he gets his own way. And I sincerely hope, and I believe that the SNP will stop Mundell from doing this, but it's worth remembering what he's fighting for here. Mundell is fighting to split up the Scottish electorate, to depower the SNP and to split the opposition, and also to consolidate his support among landowners and among fishermen, but primarily among landowners, because landowners, not just farmers, but people who own large estates, these are the people who vote Tory. These, a lot of the times, are English people who have bought large tracts of land or inherited them, or they're foreign companies run by foreign nationals, or they are bought out by Arabs, but they are not Scottish people. They don't settle here, they don't live here, but they make a fortune here. And it's these people, these landowners, that the Tories are trying to woo with this. And by giving power to Tories over things like land reform, things like pollution control, things like farming subsidies and environmental controls, it would be a colossal mistake to allow the Tories anywhere near any of that. And it would particularly be a bad idea to lose control over farming, because farming is one of the most essential things for a sustainable economy. And Scotland has more than enough food. It makes more than enough food. It grows more than enough food to supply everybody in the country and to keep everybody well fed through each year. But if the Tories have their way, they're going to start interfering with that. They might end up changing the rules about the quality of food, how it should be exported, where it should be exported. Our food might not be able to be exported. They might decide it has to all go to England. We don't know what they would do with these powers. The powers are very wide-ranging and very general, and if you actually have a look at what is being transferred, the detail in there is quite incredible. There's control over lots of different areas of farming policy, of wildlife policy, of pollution, of control of the water supply, something else which I think we should be very worried about, and the prevention of pollution of the watercourses, all falling into the hands of the very people who want to throw all that out of the window and start fracking. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today. It's going to be a lovely Friday. Unfortunately, I think the weekend's going to be a bit wetter, but keep your heads up. But remember, the SNP will be looking after our interests at Holyrood. The Greens will certainly be helping them with this, and I can't see either of those two parties allowing the Tories to do anything with these powers at all. We have to hang on for a few more months before our independence referendum, when finally, at long last, we will be able to extract ourselves from this situation where we have the Tories trying to consolidate control over us. Tories that we never voted for, a government that we didn't vote for, a Brexit that we didn't vote for, all of these things that we had no part in deciding, being forced upon us. We will never have to do them when we're independent. We will be able to control our farming, export our food the way we want, set our own standards, you name it. But the one thing we cannot afford to do is to allow David Mundell or Ruth Davidson or anybody else from the Tory party to gain any kind of power over this country. It's their power that has caused this country to be so poor for so many decades. And unless we kick them out, and unless we extract ourselves from Tory-run Britain, we are doomed to be the poorest country that produces oil anywhere on the planet. We're the only country where oil has been discovered in the entire world which is poorer than it was before it discovered oil. And that's because the oil is being stolen and none of the money from it is coming back to us. It's time we took control. It's time we stopped the Tories ruling Scotland. It's time Scotland ruled itself. I'll talk to you later. Oh, have a good weekend, everyone.